What could the Minnesota Wild roster look like in 2025-2026? There is a lot of room for interpretation. We discuss on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning into Locked on Wild, we are glad to have you and hope you stick with us through the rest of the offseason and beyond. If you are one of the everydayers that tunes in each and every day of the week, we're glad to have you back. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, Alex Micheletti joins us as we take a look at what the 2025-2026 roster could look like when all the money opens up. We'll take a look at who will still be here and who amongst the Wild prospects could be making their mark on the NHL roster by then. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. Joining us for another Monday appearance is Alex Micheletti. Alex, happy Monday, and we are gazing ahead in the crystal ball today to try to figure out what this roster may look like as we get closer to that magic 2025-2026 season in which the money's all there and the ability to fully go at this thing finally exists. And so going to be interesting today because there is a whole lot of different ways that this could go.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe by that time too, the number one center issue can finally start to be over. Multiple decades of wanting a number one center. So we'll see. Maybe one of the prospects emerges to take that spot, but at least there's money available there to actually go after one and. Maybe look at the trade market too to try to get one here as well.
Yeah, let's start by looking at the goalie room. We'll take a look at each facet, offense, defense, and the goalies as well, because it feels like there is a logical way for this to go, and the way that the Wild want it to go is that Jesper Wallstedt ends up being that guy. If you end up signing Filip Gustavsson to a 3-year deal here, or whatever his extension ends up being, if you go to arbitration, if you end up with a 1-year extension, whatever it may be, it is possible that both him and Wallstedt will be up at the same time. But I think in even assuming that happens, assuming that they're both up here, it seems pretty likely that they both wouldn't be extended in tandem, right? Or is there a possibility that if they both are up, that just continues to be your tandem for a few years?
Yeah, I don't think you see both here. Honestly, I mean, you're seeing some teams run into that issue right now. You can take a look at the Boston Bruins and Ullmark and Swayman. They're going to have to figure out who they want to pay and who they are going to have to get rid of, or try to get good assets, because they're, as we've seen in this league, the goaltending can be a big time issue. So there's teams always looking for a goalie, and so it kind of makes sense that Gustavsson kind of bridges the gap, for Jesper to be ready once he has another full year in Iowa. I don't think you want him up here unless like we've talked about in the past, where there becomes a long-term injury issue, or just desperate that you would need him up here. And so, I think he just is the bridge goalie. Gus, he's had half a season basically, or one year as a full-time guy, or 1A 1B starter, and so we'll see if he can keep it going. You can take a look at a guy that signed a contract, after having one good season in Ville Husso, and then the wheels kind of fell off this season. So you never know with goaltending. It it can be a roller coaster, and so you don't want to overpay a guy. The Wild had never really overpaid for a goalie before, so I could see it, just being another just a 1-year prove it deal for him, and then we'll see. They might have to trade him, and they could, depending on how he does this season, could get some good assets for him too.
It will be very interesting because I have a scenario kind of in my head of, let's assume that they do sign Gustavsson to, like, let's just say a 3-year deal, just because then this makes this scenario nice and neat, is that this season then Gustavsson's your one, Fleury is your backup. We're moving away from the 1A, 1B, I think, in that Fleury is in the probably final season of his career, clear backup at this point. And so you go Fleury, you go Gustavsson 1, Fleury backup. Then next season, after Wallstedt has had hopefully most of the year in Iowa to just continue to grow, continue to get starts in and to work into a rhythm, then you go with Gustavsson 1 and Wallstedt 2. And at that point then is when the change happens. You give Wallstedt the opportunity to learn at the NHL level, keep him at the NHL level that second season the entire time, and let him do his thing. Then the flip happens, and that's when I think you see what you can get for Gustavsson, because if Wallstedt ends up being the guy that they want him to be, he'll be that clear-cut number one, and so you then at that point can be a little bit more selective with how you handle the backup, because the assumption is going to be that if Wallstedt is like an Andre Vasilevsky, that then he is making like 55, 60 starts. And at that point, rookie goalie as the backup, older vet, there are a lot of options that don't necessarily need to be a like clear cut. You just don't need to necessarily spend the money on that. But then again, we have seen teams that have had to get to the postseason with multiple goalies. The Vegas Golden Knights, they got there with like 4. So it is kind of a tread cautiously, but I do think then, assuming they do more of a long-term deal with Gustavsson, I think he will be traded by the end of that deal, just because you figure that Wallstedt will be the guy, and you move him at that point.
Yeah, I mean, you don't spend that high of a pick on a guy that you think is going to be a backup. You're expecting him to be a decade plus starting goaltender in the NHL when you're picking that high in a guy with Jesper, and just based on his progression at every level so far, he's looked great. I mean, he was. He just played in the World Championships too, and he looked awesome there. He actually played against Marco Rossi there, so that was kind of interesting to see him play against a teammate. And so, yeah, the future is so bright for him, and like we've talked about, just has to get more comfortable into the pro game over here, and keep having success down there in Iowa. And they've kind of struggled as a team as a whole, not entirely his fault, but they'll be having a new coaching staff there, and Brett McLean is going to be the head man down there, and so it'll be nice to because he can get guys to the NHL there. He coached with the Wild, and so I think it was the perfect hire to help get the prospects ready to help in St. Paul, because they're going to need them, as we know, with the buyout money still lingering. So I think that's why they went with the change, is because they were not happy with how guys were developing, and so hopefully that new voice can help and get these guys prepared.
Most definitely. The last thing that I'll add on the goalie side is Wallstedt is on his ELC right now, and that runs through the 2024-2025 season. So by the end of next season, by the end of this season, you want him to be up at the NHL level full time so that you can give him a full season to just get his starts in. And so that kind of, I think, coincides further with that timeline, assuming we're still waiting on the Gustavsson contract news, and it sounds like this could drag on past the draft. And so pretty much all of it hinges on what happens there. Now that is a little more kind of murky picture to try to define. I think the other pieces of this team will be a little easier to see how this plays out. And so we'll move to the defensive side of the ice and look at what that pairing, those pairings may look like as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we've got a double feature for you coming up tomorrow. We'll get through 2 evals as we continue to get those finished up. Jon Merrill and Alex Goligoski. So that will be fun, I'm sure. But continuing to power through those so that once we get into next week for the draft, we're all set and ready to rock. We can bring you a few episodes leading up to the draft. Then we'll have a little bit of a look at free agency. And then after that, we kind of start to shift our focus towards next year as well. So continuing to just keep the ball rolling here at Locked On Wild. Now, Alex, as we continue our chat, looking ahead on this roster, I think defense might be the easiest part of this process to look at because everybody's pretty much locked in. If we look at the defensive side of the puck, you've got Spurgeon and Brodin. They're locked in well past 2025, 2026. Jake Middleton will be an unrestricted free agent after the 2024-2025 season, as will Jon Merrill. Alex Goligoski will have been an unrestricted free agent after next season. And so some of those pieces on that back end start to really fall off. But you have a lot of the cost. Already slotted in. And so I guess the biggest question here is, do we see Jake Middleton get extended again, or do the Wilds opt to just fill from within that prospect pool? I mean, defensively, you've got Kyle Masters, you've got Carson Lambos, you've got Ryan O'Rourke, you've got Damon Hunt, you've got a lot of names that are going to be on ELCs through that 2025-2026 season. And so the big question there is, beyond Spurgeon and Brodin, do you think we see the Wild defensively just fill from within?
Yeah, you're at some point they're going to have to. I mean, they have so much talent on the back end in their prospect pool. That's probably if you look at all the positions that they have, that's where they have the most depth. They're probably going to have to trade a couple guys because you can't fit everybody. But you'd love to see a guy like Carson Lambos get a shot there. He has some size, good grit, and I think he could definitely fill that Middleton role. he's been great here. That was a shrewd move made by Bill Guerin to get him here from San Jose, who's in a tank mode. So it was nice to get a guy like that. At some point you want to take a look at these prospects. I'm really high on Jack Peart too. Just watching him as close as I do with college hockey. He's had a great career at St. Cloud, and he looks like he's going to be a pro player for sure. And so I'm excited for his development. Of course, you got Brock Faber too, who's just only going to get better in a top 4 role, hopefully here, and just continue, his progression. And so, but you got, like you said, Masters too, who's looked great in junior hockey. So the future's bright on the back end, and they're going to need some of these cheaper contracts just because you're paying Spurgeon and Brodin a ton of money right now. So,
I wonder too if we see, and I would still say of the two, I would still say that Brodin has still more of the value for the contract that he signed. He's younger, his contract is cheaper. And so I would say of the two that if one of them is to be moved, it still probably feels like it's Jared Spurgeon, right?
Yeah, I was debating that. You could probably get a ton more for Brodin just because he's such a unique player. I mean, he doesn't score at all. He's not an offensive defenseman, but I don't know. It's tough. These two, we hear it all the time. They are good enough to get you into the playoffs, but in the playoffs, that it seems to be a different story for those two. Especially Spurgeon had a really tough series against Dallas. So did Brodin. Brodin didn't look great either. But you're locked in with these guys. You'd have to ask them to move them. But that's a tough one. That's a 50-50. But Spurgeon, he's brilliant in the regular season. Just it seems like he gets beat up a lot in the playoffs. But hopefully they can turn around still in their times here with both of them.
Most definitely. And the other part of this equation too is that you can find those back end guys. It seems like you can find a third pairing defenseman quite easily. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be Jon Merrill.
No.
I would be shocked if Goligoski signs another contract after his is done. I think it's trending way towards he's just done at that point. And I get the feeling that I think the Jon Merrill situation is going to end the same way that Dmitry Kulikov's did, in which there just is a surprise kind of trade that comes out of nowhere. I know he's very well liked by the team, is a good presence on the team, but it just feels like it's hard to kind of come back from being benched down the stretch and just reinserted into the lineup. Although, unless something happens, it seems like that's exactly where we're headed.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's him and our guy Kalen Addison too. It's just when you get benched like that, and the coach, it has no faith in either of them. That it's tough to get back in the lineup, and both of those guys might get moved. But it's also hard too. Is there a market for those type of guys too? You're gonna have to, get lucky with a team that's willing to take on those contracts. It's the same thing with Goligoski. I'm sure Bill Guerin would love to move him right now, but you're gonna have to find a team. So you're looking at teams that have a ton of cap space and are just have no plans really to win a cup. Might need a veteran player or take a chance on a younger guy like Kalen Addison. So you're reaching out to the Arizonas of the world, the Anaheims, San Jose. So it's just like bottom of the barrel teams. You probably aren't going to get a whole lot back, but to get them off the books, that's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, that's the real reward is right. Take this contract so that we don't have to deal with it anymore. And we'll do that for relatively cheap,
yes.
Just so that we can get that
7th round draft pick, anything. Yeah,
I would take that at this point if it meant that Jon Merrill's contract was off the books.
Yes,
but it is it is interesting because there are a lot of intriguing names that that could help, especially defensively. I think those top three guys that we discussed, Faber, Masters, and Lambos, the most likely, which means that maybe that ends up being your third pairing is Masters and Lambos. Give them a chance to get some NHL experience. Faber obviously is going to be in the top four, destined to be, I think, higher up than that, maybe even a top two. And so it seems like there are more answers defensively than there are offensively. There are a lot of questions on the offensive side. And so we'll finish today's episode by trying to tackle just what the top six, what the bottom six looks like in 2025, 2026. That's on the way after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thanks for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day for the everydayers. Make sure that you tune in as we continue our player evals. We'll talk Jon Merrill and Alex Goligoski, and we'll pivot off of this a little bit as to kind of what comes next for those guys here this upcoming season. Alex Micheletti joining us today, and we are going to finish by talking about the offense, because there is a lot of potential movement offensively that we could see for this team. In fact, only 4 players will be on the roster at that point, at least definitively. Kirill Kaprizov will be in the final year of his deal in 2025-2026. You also have Matt Boldy, Joel Eriksson Ek, and Freddie Gaudreau all locked into contracts. And so let's just tackle the big question first. Mats Zuccarello is 35. He will be an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season. Marcus Foligno is 31. He will also be an unrestricted free agent at the end of this season. And I'll throw Ryan Hartman in as well. Hartman is going to be an unrestricted free agent. He's 28 right now. Do you see any of those three being given a mid-level extension to stay around for maybe 1 or 2 more years? Or do we see the likes of some of the prospects, Adam Beckman for one, Marco Rossi, obviously, Liam Ohgren? Do we see those guys start to take those spots?
Yeah, I think you start the youth movement for sure. And just the way Zuccarello played down the stretch, it was awful. He had an awful playoff too. He had that one good game where he stepped up, but other than that, it was brutal second half for him. But you have to start letting these young guys, make it. And I could see them re-signing Ryan Hartman. But they need some of that younger talent to help Kirill. And hopefully they have another extension for Kirill ready to go before that end of that season, just so they can figure out cap wise what they have after that. And hopefully you could see Boldy playing with Kaprizov. That every time they played together, a little bit, it was electric, and obviously they're fun to watch on the power play too. So yeah. I'd love to see that pair play together at some point.
And I would say this: if you're going to look at potentially having Hartman re-up for a couple of years, I would say then don't for Marcus Foligno. Let his deal go. I would be amenable to, well, and then the other thing is you don't have any money to do it. I was going to say I would be amenable to maybe a 1-year extension for Zuccarello if he plays well this season. But again, let's just go down the names of the players that could be here by the time that we get to 2025, 2026. I mean, Liam Ohgren, from what we have been told, Gabe Foley, last week's guest talking NHL draft, discussed this a little bit. Said Ohgren looks fantastic. He's looking really good. And so I think there is real good chance that we see him by the time his ELC is up. Obviously, you hope that's the case, but I would say within the next 2 years, I think there's a real good chance that we see him. Adam Beckman will be a restricted free agent after this year. I think the organization likes what he does a lot, and so I'll be shocked if he's not retained. And then you look at some of the other names. I mean, Marco Rossi, a restricted free agent after 2024, 2025, so he's going to get a spot. I would be really shocked if he doesn't get one this year, but the roster this season is pretty full. So I would like to see it because I think you and I are hitting on the overall general theme here is that you have to start this youth movement to get some of these guys looks so that you know what you have, because it's going to be a mostly blank canvas by the time 2025, 2026 rolls around. And so you got to get those guys the looks so that you can separate who are these are definite NHLers. These are maybe fringe guys, and these guys can't help us at all.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And then you can start to see them hopefully make deeper runs because they can mix in this high-end talent with some free agents, or actually make some trades that are viable to the team. Guys that can produce big time when it comes to the playoffs. I mean, you take a look at a team like Vegas in Florida too. Both of those teams made some big time moves to change the aspect of their teams. You look at Florida, trading their best player and getting Tkachuk back, and in Vegas making big time moves, getting Eichel there, and so that's the dream for the Wild is when they have the money available. If some of these prospects, if they don't see them in their futures, that they can use them as assets to get that number one center or get another high scoring winger to help Kaprizov, because it seems like when it comes to the playoffs that there's so much pressure on Kirill solely to be that guy. Same thing with Matt Boldy. I mean, we forget how young Matt Boldy is still too.
Yeah.
And so you could tell when they talked to him at the end of the year that he was massively disappointed in himself and really hard on himself. And so hopefully, that in the future year they have another big time asset on the forward ranks to help them if these prospects don't fully step up.
And there will be others added since, right. I mean, there are other names that are on this list that aren't necessarily on ELCs yet, or just have not entered into the equation. I know the big one Spoke Z talks about quite a bit is Marat Hustendinov. So that's a name to watch.
Oh, yeah.
As he continues to do his thing. You've got Danila Yurov as well. Some of these
first
guys,
rounder,
some of these guys will gravitate towards Iowa here within the next couple of years is the hope, and then after that you can get a clearer timetable as to when they can come up and help. But again, the main point, the big takeaway from today's episode is that this is why you need to see some of these young kids get some playing time over the next couple of seasons, because you have a handful of players that are locked in past 2025, 2026. And beyond that, it's pretty wide open.
Yeah, of course.
Give these guys a shot to see what you have with them, and just start to check off some boxes as you get to that point, because this is the window, this is the time frame that Bill Guerin has been adamant about, is that once the cap hits for Parise and Suter go down to just the buyouts, you're down to just that $1.6 million for both, then there aren't any excuses. There's no excuse, because that's what we have been moving towards this whole time. And if the winning doesn't happen there, there's nothing to hide behind. So We'll see what happens. It is interesting just to start to kind of look into that crystal ball, because as much as we try to clearly define, there still is a lot of room for interpretation. So we will leave things at that for today. That'll do it for today's episode of Locked On Wilds. Again, if this is your first time tuning in to Locked On Wild, we thank you for joining us today and hope that you stick with Locked On Wild through the rest of the offseason into next season as well. If you are one of the everydayers that tunes in on a daily basis, thanks for tuning in once again today. And we'll have a double feature for you tomorrow. So make sure to tune in for that. Make sure either way you follow us on YouTube and subscribe on your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new content throughout the week. We have new episodes for you each and every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.